The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. I stood there, coffee mug trembling in my hands, watching my mother's face crumble like old paper. The smell of burnt toast hung in the air, mixing with the faint scent of her lavender perfume, the same one she had worn every day for the past 20 years. Her hands, weathered and spotted with age, clutched a stack of papers so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The silence between us felt heavy, oppressive, like the air before a thunderstorm. She had signed them, without reading, without asking me, without consulting anyone. My father had been gone for 3 years now, and in that time I had watched my mother slowly lose herself in a fog of grief and confusion. But this was different. This was catastrophic. The papers she held were not just any documents. They were the deed to our family home, the mortgage refinance agreements, the power of attorney forms that gave my uncle, her brother, complete control over everything she owned, everything we owned. I set my coffee down on the counter, the ceramic making a sharp click against the tile that seemed to echo through the entire house. The sound made her flinch. Outside, I could hear the neighbor's dog barking, the distant rumble of traffic on the highway, the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning in suburban Ohio. But inside this kitchen, inside this moment, everything had changed. "Tell me you didn't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you didn't sign everything over to Uncle Ray." Her eyes, pale blue and watery, met mine for just a second before darting away. The fluorescent light above us buzzed softly, flickering in that way it had been doing for months. I had meant to fix it. There were so many things I had meant to fix. He said it would be easier, she said, her voice thin and fragile. He said with your father gone, I needed help managing things. He said he would take care of everything. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my chest tighten, my breath coming shorter. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too hot, despite the November chill seeping through the old windows. I could feel sweat beginning to form at the back of my neck, could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mom," I said, try and keep my voice steady, try not to let the panic show. "Mom, I've been helping you. I've been paying the bills, managing the accounts, making sure everything was taken care of. Why would you do this without talking to me?" She turned away, facing a window that looked out onto the backyard where my father had planted rose bushes a year before he died. They were overgrown now, wild and tangled, their blooms long since faded. Her shoulders shook slightly, and I knew she was crying, though she made no sound. "He's my brother," she said finally. "He said you were too young, too busy with your own life. He said I was becoming a burden to you." The word hung in the air between us. Burden. As if caring for the woman who had raised me, who had sat by my bedside through every childhood illness, who had worked 2 jobs to put me through college, could ever be a burden. I felt anger rise in my throat, hot and bitter, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't her fault. Not really. Uncle Ray had always been a manipulator. Always been the kind of man who could sell ice to someone freezing in a snowstorm. "When did you sign them?" I asked. "When did this happen?" "Last week," she said, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "He came by when you were at work. He brought his lawyer friend. They said it was all standard, all normal. They said everyone does this when they get to be my age. Last week, 7 days. 7 days during which Uncle Ray had probably already started moving pieces around like chess pieces on a board. 7 days during which I had been completely unaware that my entire world was being dismantled. I picked up the papers from where she had set them down on the kitchen table. The table where we had eaten thousands of meals together, where I had done my homework as a child, where my father had taught me to play poker on rainy Sunday afternoons. The wood was scarred and stained, marked by years of living. I wondered if Uncle Ray would keep it, or he would sell it along with everything else. The legal language swam before my eyes, whereas in hereinafter and party of the first part. But the meaning was clear enough. My mother had signed over everything. The house, the savings account, the life insurance payout for my father's death, even the car. All of it now belonged to a trust controlled entirely by Raymond Mitchell, my uncle, A man I had never trusted. A man my father had warned me about more than once. "We need to call a lawyer," I said, my mind already racing ahead, trying to figure out what could be done, what could be salvaged. "We need to see if we can undo this." My mother turned back to face me, and the look in her eyes made my stomach drop. It was defeat, complete and total defeat. He said if I tried to fight it, if I caused any trouble, he would have me declared incompetent, she said. He said he would put me in a home. He said you wouldn't be able to stop him. The bastard. The absolute bastard. I felt my hands clenching into fists, felt my jaw tightening so hard my teeth ached. Uncle Ray had thought of everything, had covered every angle. He had isolated her, scared her, made her feel like she had no choice, no way out. The refrigerator hummed to life, its motor rattling in that familiar way. I had grown up with that sound. This house was full of sounds I knew by heart. The creak of the third step on the stairs, the way the pipes knocked when you turned on the hot water, the whistle of wind through the gap in the attic window. This was my home. This was where I had learned to walk, to read, to be a person in the world. And now some lawyer I had never met was to tell me it belonged to someone else. "I'm not going to let him do this," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I'm going to fight this, Mom. We're going to fight this." But even as I said the words, I could feel the weight of what lay ahead. Legal battles were expensive, time-consuming, emotionally draining. And Uncle Ray had resources. He had always been the successful one in the family, the one with the big house in the nice neighborhood, the one who drove a new car every 2 years. My father used to say that Ray had never met a dollar. He didn't love more than his own family. I spent the rest of that day on the phone. First with legal aid services, then with elder abuse hotlines, then with every lawyer in the county who would take my call. The responses were all variations on the same theme. If she signed willingly, if she was of sound mind at the time, if there was no evidence of coercion, then the documents were likely valid, likely enforceable, likely impossible to overturn. By the time the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that I barely noticed, I had a splitting headache and a growing sense of dread. I sat at my father's old desk in the study, surrounded by his books and his photographs, and I felt more alone than I had since the day he died. My mother had gone to bed early, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. I could hear her moving around upstairs, the familiar sounds of her nighttime routine, water running in the bathroom, the creak of her bedroom door, the soft thump of her slippers being kicked off, and then silence. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. My cousin Sarah, Uncle Ray's daughter. We had been close once, as children, before life and family politics had pulled us in different directions. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since my father's funeral, where she had stood on the opposite side of the cemetery, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Hello," she said, her voice cautious, uncertain. "Sarah, it's me. It's Jamie." A pause. I could hear music in the background, something classical, and the sound of dishes clinking. "Jamie," she said, and there was something in her tone I couldn't quite read. "I was wondering when you would call. So, you know," I said, "you know what your father did." Another pause, longer this time. The music in the background stopped abruptly. "I know," she said finally. "I tried to talk him out of it. I told him it was wrong, that Aunt Linda didn't understand what she was signing. But he wouldn't listen. He never listens." I felt a small spark of hope. If Sarah was willing to testify, if she could provide evidence that Uncle Ray had manipulated my mother, then maybe we had a chance. "Will you help me?" I asked. "Will you testify about what you know?" The silence that followed was answer enough. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel her internal struggle. "I can't," she said, and her voice broke slightly. "Jamie, I'm sorry, but I can't. He's my father. And if I go against him, he'll cut me off completely. I have kids. I have a mortgage. I have bills. I can't afford to lose his support." The spark of hope died as quickly as it had ignited. I understood, in a distant, intellectual way. Sarah was in an impossible position, but understanding didn't make it hurt any less. I hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon frying and coffee brewing. For a moment, still caught in a hazy space between sleep and waking, I thought everything was normal. I thought my father was downstairs making breakfast like he used to do every Saturday morning. Then reality crashed back in, heavy and cold. I found my mother in the kitchen, standing at the stove, her back straight, her movements deliberate. She had put on makeup. I noticed something she hadn't done in weeks. Her hair was brushed and pinned back. She was wearing the blue cardigan my father had given her for their 40th anniversary. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, not turning around. "I made your favorite. Bacon and eggs, just how you like them." I sat down at the table, watching her, trying to understand this sudden change. Yesterday she had been broken, defeated. Today she seemed almost cheerful, as if nothing had happened, as if our entire world wasn't falling apart. "Mom," I said carefully, "we need to talk about what we're going to do." She set a plate in front of me, the eggs perfectly cooked, the bacon crispy at the edges. The smell should have made my mouth water, but my stomach was twisted in knots. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting down across from me with her own plate. "Maybe Ray is right. Maybe it is too much for me to handle. Maybe it's better this way." I set down my fork, the metal clanging against the plate louder than I intended. "Mom, no, you can't just give up. This is your home. This is everything Dad worked for." Her face changed then, a flash of something, anger maybe or pain, crossing her features before settling back into that strange, forced calm. "Your father is dead," she said, and the words were sharp, cutting. "He's been dead for 3 years, and I'm tired, Jamie. I'm so tired of trying to hold everything together. I'm tired of pretending I understand all the bills and the taxes and the insurance forms. I'm tired of being afraid I'm going to make a mistake and lose everything anyway." Her voice had risen, and I could see her hand shaking as she gripped her coffee mug. The cheerful mask was cracking, revealing the exhaustion and fear beneath. "So you'd rather just hand it all over to Uncle Ray," I said, and I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. "You'd rather let him take everything than let me help you. It's not about you," she snapped, and then immediately looked away, as if surprised by her own vehemence. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I can't be a burden to you anymore. You have your own life to live." There was that word again. Burden. I wondered how many times Uncle Ray had used it, how many times he had planted that seed in her mind until it had taken root and grown into this twisted belief that needing help, needing family, was somehow shameful. I pushed my plate away, the food untouched. "I'm going to see a lawyer today," I said. "A real lawyer, not legal aid. I'm going to find out exactly what our options are." She didn't respond, just stared down at her own plate, her eggs growing cold. "I found a lawyer through a friend of a friend, a woman named Patricia Chun, who specialized in elder law and estate disputes. Her office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, the kind of place that smelled like old wood and furniture polish. The receptionist, a young man with carefully styled hair and a friendly smile, offered me coffee while I waited. I accepted, grateful for something to do with my hands. Patricia Chun was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found immediately reassuring. She listened without interrupting as I explained the situation, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen making soft scratching sounds against the paper. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, tapping her pen against her lips thoughtfully. Through the window behind her, I could see the street outside, people walking past, living their normal lives, unaware of the crisis unfolding in this quiet office. "Okay," she said finally, "here's what we're dealing with. If your mother signed these documents of her own free will, and if she was mentally competent at the time of signing, then legally they're valid. However, there are a few avenues we can explore." She flipped through the copies of the documents I had brought, her eyes scanning the dense legal text with practiced efficiency. "First, we can argue undue influence. If we can prove that your uncle pressured her, manipulated her, or took advantage of her vulnerable emotional state, we might be able to get the documents voided. Second, we can question her mental competency at the time of signing. Has she been diagnosed with any cognitive issues? Dementia, Alzheimer's, anything like that? I shook my head. No formal diagnosis. But I paused, searching for the right words. She's been different since Dad died. More forgetful, more confused. She gets overwhelmed easily. Patricia nodded, making more notes. We'll need to get her evaluated by a doctor, preferably a specialist in geriatric psychiatry. If they find evidence of cognitive decline, that could support our case. Third, and this is important, we need to look at the circumstances of the signing itself. You said your uncle brought his lawyer friend. Was there anyone else present? Any witnesses who might testify about what was said? How your mother seemed? I thought back to what my mother had told me. Uncle Ray, his lawyer friend, and my mother alone in this house. No witnesses. No one to corroborate what had really happened. I don't think so, I said, feeling that hope slipping away again. It was just the three of them. Patricia set down her pen and looked at me directly, her expression serious. I'm going to be honest with you, Jamie. This is going to be difficult. Your uncle clearly knew what he was doing. He isolated your mother, brought legal representation, made sure everything looked legitimate on paper. But difficult doesn't mean impossible. If you're willing to fight, if your mother is willing to fight, then we have a chance. How much is this going to cost? I asked, because I had to know, had to understand what I was getting into. She named a figure that made my stomach drop. It was more than I had in savings, more than I could afford without taking out loans, without putting myself in serious financial jeopardy. But what choice did I have? This was my mother. This was my home. I'll do it, I said, whatever it takes. Patricia smiled, a small, tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then let's get started. The next few weeks passed in a blur of appointments and paperwork and phone calls. Patricia filed a motion to freeze the assets, to prevent Uncle Ray from selling the house or draining the accounts while the case was pending. Uncle Ray responded with his own lawyer, a man named Douglas Hartman, who had a reputation for being ruthless and expensive. My mother went through a battery of tests with a geriatric psychiatrist, a kind woman named Dr. Reeves, who had an office that smelled like chamomile tea and had soft music playing in the waiting room. I sat outside during the evaluations, listening to the muffled sound of their conversation, unable to make out the words, but hearing the rise and fall of my mother's voice, sometimes steady, sometimes breaking. When the evaluation was complete, Dr. Reeves called me into her office. My mother had already left, driven home by a neighbor who had offered to help. The doctor's face was grave as she gestured for me to sit. Your mother is showing signs of early-stage cognitive decline, she said without preamble. It's not severe enough to warrant a diagnosis of dementia at this point, but there are definite deficits in her executive function, her ability to process complex information, her judgment in certain situations. Is it enough, I asked, is it enough to prove she didn't understand what she was signing? Dr. Reeves hesitated, choosing her words carefully. It's enough to raise questions. It's enough to suggest that she may have been vulnerable to manipulation. But whether it's enough to invalidate the documents, that's for the court to decide. The court date was set for early February, 3 months away. 3 months of living in limbo, of not knowing whether we would still have a home, whether my mother would still have her independence. 3 months during which Uncle Ray continued to circle like a vulture, calling my mother when he knew I wouldn't be home, sending her letters filled with legal jargon and thinly veiled threats. I came home one evening in late December to find her sitting in the dark living room, no lights on, just a glow from the street lamp outside casting shadows across her face. She was holding one of Uncle Ray's letters, and even in the dim light, I could see that she had been crying. I turned on the lamp, the sudden brightness making both of us blink. The room came into focus, the familiar furniture, the family photos on the mantel, the Christmas tree I had put up the week before in a desperate attempt to maintain some sense of normalcy. The colored lights blinked on and off, red and green and gold, cheerful and incongruous. What does it say? I asked, sitting down beside her on the couch, the old cushion sighing under my weight. She handed me the letter without speaking. I read it quickly, my anger building with each line. Uncle Ray was offering a settlement. If we dropped the lawsuit, he would allow my mother to remain in the house for 2 more years, rent-free. After that, The house would be sold, and the proceeds would go into the trust he controlled. My mother would receive a monthly allowance, the amount to be determined by him. It was insulting. It was manipulative. It was exactly what I expected from him. "We're not taking it," I said, crumpling the letter in my fist. "We're going to court, and we're going to win." But my mother didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the Christmas tree, at the lights blinking their endless pattern. I noticed in how thin she had gotten, how the skin on her face seemed to hang loose, how her clothes didn't fit quite right anymore. The stress was eating her alive. "What if we lose?" she said finally, her voice barely audible over the hum of the furnace kicking on. "What if we go through all of this, spend all that money, and we lose anyway? Then we'll have nothing. At least with Ray's offer, I can stay here for a little while longer." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that we couldn't give up, that we had to fight. But looking at her, seeing the exhaustion etched into every line of her face, I felt my resolve wavering. Was I doing this for her, or was I doing this for myself? Was I fighting to protect her, or was I fighting because I couldn't accept that I had failed to prevent this in the first place? The Christmas tree lights continued their pattern. Blink, blink, blink. Red, green, gold. The ornaments hanging from the branches were ones I had known my entire life. The wooden soldier my father had bought the year I was born. The glass angel my grandmother had given us. The handmade snowflake I had created in 2nd grade, lopsided and covered in too much glitter. Each one a memory, a moment in time, a piece of our family history. "I'm not giving up," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "I'm not letting him win." Christmas came and went, a subdued affair. I cooked a small turkey, and we ate in near silence, the empty chair at the head of the table a constant reminder of who was missing. My mother picked at her food, barely eating, and I found myself doing the same. The house felt cold despite the heat running, felt empty despite both of us being there. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone in my father's study, going through old photo albums, torturing myself with memories of better times. There was my father, young and strong, holding me as a baby. There was my mother, her face unlined and smiling, standing in front of this very house on the day they bought it. There were birthday parties and graduations and holidays, a whole life documented in fading photographs. I found a letter tucked into one of the albums, written in my father's handwriting. It was addressed to my mother, dated just a few months before he died. I knew I shouldn't read it, knew it was private, but I couldn't help myself. "My dearest Linda," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry to leave you. I know how hard this will be, how lost you'll feel, but I need you to know that you are stronger than you think. You are capable of so much more than you give yourself credit for. Don't let anyone, not even family, make you feel small or helpless. You are the strongest person I know, and I love you more than words can say. Take care of our girl. Take care of yourself. And remember, this house is not just wood and brick. It's every moment we shared, every laugh, every tear, every ordinary day that made up our extraordinary life together. Don't let anyone take that from you." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, my father's words echoing in my mind. Don't let anyone take that from you. He had known. Somehow, he had known that this might happen, that Uncle Ray might try something, and he had tried to warn her, tried to give her strength for what was to come. I took the letter to my mother the next morning. She was in the kitchen again, always the kitchen, making coffee with shaking hands. I set the letter on the table in front of her. Without saying anything, she read it slowly, her lips moving slightly as she took in each word. When she finished, she set it down carefully, smoothing out the creases with her fingertips. Then she looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. "He's right," she said. "Your father is right. I've been letting Ray make me feel helpless, letting him convince me that I can't manage on my own. But I can. With your help, I can." She stood up, her movements suddenly purposeful, and walked to the phone hanging on the wall. She dialed a number from memory, and I realized with a start that she was calling Uncle Ray. "Ray," she said when he answered, her voice steady and clear, "I got your settlement offer, and I'm calling to tell you that I reject it. I reject all of it. You manipulated me. You took advantage of me when I was grieving and confused, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. I'll see you in court." She hung up before he could respond. And then she turned to me, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Now," she said, "let's win this thing." The weeks leading up to the trial were intense. Patricia prepared us thoroughly, conducting mock examinations, going over every detail of the case, anticipating every argument the other side might make. We gathered evidence. Statements from neighbors who had witnessed my mother's confusion in the months after my father's death. Records showing that Uncle Ray had visited multiple times in the weeks before the signing, always when I was at work. We also discovered something interesting. Uncle Ray had significant debts. Gambling debts according to one source, business debts according to another. He needed money, and he needed it fast. The house, if sold, would fetch a good price. The life insurance payout was substantial. He had motive, clear and undeniable motive. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, at the glow in the dark stars I had stuck up there when I was 10 years old. They were faded now, barely visible, but I knew exactly where each one was. I had arranged them to match the real constellations, spending hours with a library book, making sure I got it right. I thought about all the nights I had spent in this room, all the dreams I had dreamed, all the fears I had faced. This room had been my sanctuary, my safe place. And now it might all be taken away because of greed, because of manipulation, because one man valued money more than family. I heard my mother moving around in her room next door, heard the creak of her bed as she got up, the soft pad of her feet on the carpet. A moment later, there was a gentle knock on my door. "Can't sleep either," she said, opening the door and peering in. No, I admitted. She came in and sat on the edge of my bed, just like she used to do when I was a child and had nightmares. The mattress dipped under her weight, and I shifted over to make room. "I'm scared," she said, and her honesty surprised me. "I'm scared of what might happen tomorrow. But I'm also, I don't know, relieved maybe, relieved that I'm finally standing up for myself. Your father will be proud." "He would be proud of you," I said. "You're so much stronger than you think." We sat there in the darkness, mother and daughter, drawing strength from each other, preparing for the battle ahead. The courthouse was an imposing building, all gray stone and tall columns, the kind of architecture designed to make you feel small and insignificant. We arrived early, my mother clutching my arm as we climbed the steps, her heels clicking against the stone with each careful step. The February wind cut through our coats, sharp and bitter, carrying the smell of exhaust from the busy street, and something else, something metallic and cold that seemed to come from the building itself. Inside, the air was warmer but no less intimidating. Our footsteps echoed in the marble hallway, bouncing off walls lined with portraits of stern-faced judges from decades past. The smell of floor wax and old paper hung heavy in the air. People moved around us with purpose, lawyers in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases, clerks pushing carts loaded with files, families huddled together on wooden benches, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. Patricia met us outside the courtroom, looking crisp and professional in a navy suit, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She gave us both a reassuring smile, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed against her briefcase. "Remember what we talked about," she said to my mother, her voice low and calm. "Answer the questions honestly and directly. Don't let them rattle you. And if you need a break at any time, just say so." My mother nodded, but I could feel her trembling against me. I squeezed her hand, trying to transfer some of my own nervous energy into something resembling confidence. We entered the courtroom, and I was struck by how ordinary it looked. I had expected something grand, something that matched the weight of what was happening. Instead, it was just a room, with wooden benches and fluorescent lights and a flag hanging limply in the corner. The judge's bench sat empty at the front, dark with polish to a shine, waiting. Uncle Ray was already there, sitting at the defendant's table with his lawyer, Douglas Hartman. Ray looked good, I had to admit. He was wearing an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his face arranged in an expression of concerned benevolence. He looked like someone's kindly uncle, someone who would never dream of taking advantage of his own sister. when he saw us. He smiled sadly and gave a little wave, as if this whole thing was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. I felt my mother stiffen beside me, felt her grip on my hand tighten. I looked at her and saw that her jaw was set, her eyes focused straight ahead. She didn't wave back. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table, and Patricia began arranging her documents, creating neat stacks of evidence and exhibits. The courtroom slowly filled with other people, a court reporter who set up her strange little machine, a bailiff who stood by the door with his arms crossed, a few spectators who had wandered in looking for entertainment or education or just a place to sit out of the cold. All rise, the bailiff called out, and we stood as the judge entered. She was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Judge Margaret Thornton, according to the nameplate on her bench. She settled into her chair with the air of someone who had done this 1,000 times before and would do it 1,000 times more. "Be seated," she said, in the room filled with the sound people sitting, papers rustling, throats being cleared. The trial began with opening statements. Patricia went first, laying out our case with clear, precise language. She painted a picture of a vulnerable widow, still grieving the loss of her husband, taken advantage of by her own brother, who saw an opportunity for financial gain. She talked about the lack of independent legal counsel, the pressure tactics, the cognitive decline that made my mother susceptible to manipulation. Douglas Hartman's opening statement was smooth and practiced. He portrayed Uncle Ray as a concerned brother, worried about his sister's ability to manage her affairs, acting out of love and familial duty. He suggested that I was the one with ulterior motives, that I was trying to control my mother's assets for my own benefit, that this lawsuit was nothing more than a family squabble dressed up in legal language. I felt my face burning as he spoke, felt the unfairness of his words like physical blows. But Patricia had warned me about this, had told me that they would try to make me look bad, would try to shift the focus away from Uncle Ray's actions. The first witness was Dr. Reeves, the geriatric psychiatrist. She took the stand with calm professionalism, her credentials impressive and unassailable. Patricia walked her through the evaluation process, the tests she had administered, the conclusions she had reached. "In your professional opinion," Patricia asked, "was Mrs. Mitchell capable of fully understanding the legal and financial implications of the document she signed?" Dr. Reeves paused, considering her words carefully. "Based on my evaluation," she said, "Mrs. Mitchell was experiencing cognitive decline that would have impaired her ability to process complex information. While she was not incompetent in a legal sense, she was vulnerable to influence, particularly from someone she trusted, particularly in a high-pressure situation." Douglas Hartman's cross-examination was aggressive. He questioned Dr. Reeves' methodology, suggested that the evaluation had been conducted months after signing, and therefore couldn't accurately reflect my mother's mental state at the time, implied that she had been hired to reach a predetermined conclusion. But Dr. Reeves held her ground, answering each question with professional detachment, never getting flustered, never backing down from her assessment. The next witness was Mrs. Chun, our neighbor of 15 years. She was a small woman in her 70s, with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly as she was sworn in. Patricia asked her about her observations of my mother in the months following my father's death. She was lost, Mrs. Chun said, her voice soft but clear. I would see her standing in her yard, just standing there, looking confused. One time I found her at the grocery store, cried because she couldn't remember what she had come to buy. Another time she knocked on my door at 10 at night, asking if I had seen her husband, forgetting that he had passed. It broke my heart. "Did you ever see the defendant, Mr. Raymond Mitchell, visiting the house?" Patricia asked. "Oh, yes," Mrs. Chun said. "He started coming around a lot, maybe 2 months after the funeral. Always during the day, always when Jamie was at work. I thought it was nice at first, that he was checking on his sister. But then I noticed that Linda seemed more upset after his visits, not less. She would be agitated, distracted." Douglas Hartman tried to discredit her testimony, suggesting that she was simply a nosy neighbor who didn't understand the full situation, that her observations were colored by her friendship with my mother. But Mrs. Chun was unshakable, her simple honesty more powerful than any legal maneuvering. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The bailiff held out a Bible, and I placed my hand on it, feeling the worn leather under my palm, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Patricia's questions were gentle, designed to let me tell our story. I talked about my father's death, about how my mother had struggled, about how I had stepped in to help manage the household finances and daily tasks. I talked about coming home that morning to find her with the papers, about the devastation I had felt, about Uncle Ray's history of putting money before family. Then Douglas Hartman stood up for cross-examination, and I braced myself. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "isn't it true that you were living in your mother's house rent-free?" "I was living there to take care of her," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you weren't paying rent, were you? You weren't contributing to the mortgage or the utilities." "I was paying for groceries, for household expenses, for things she needed, but not rent," he pressed. "So you had a financial interest in maintaining the status quo, didn't you? You had a reason to want to prevent your uncle from taking control of the property." I felt my face flushing, felt anger rising in my throat. "My interest was in protecting my mother," I said. "My interest was in making sure she wasn't taken advantage of." "Or perhaps," he said, walking closer to the witness stand, his shoes making soft sounds against the carpet, "your interest was in maintaining your own comfortable living situation. Perhaps you saw your uncle's involvement as a threat to your own financial security." "That's not true," I said, but even in my own ears, my voice sounded offensive. He continued in this vein for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, twisting my words, making my care for my mother sound like selfishness, making my concern sound like greed. By the time he finished, I felt wrung out, exhausted, close to tears. When I returned to my seat, my mother reached over and took my hand. Her palm was cold and damp, but her grip was firm. She leaned close and whispered, "You did well. Don't let him make you doubt yourself." The judge called for a lunch recess, and we filed out of the courtroom into the hallway. The smell of coffee from a nearby vending machine mixed with the scent of someone's perfume, something floral and too strong. My stomach was in knots, and the thought of eating made me feel sick, but Patricia insisted we needed to keep our strength up. We found a small diner a few blocks from the courthouse, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and laminated menus sticky with age. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with gray roots showing through her dyed blonde hair, took our orders with mechanical efficiency. I ordered soup, something simple that I thought I might be able to keep down. My mother ordered the same. "You're doing great," Patricia said, dumping sugar into her coffee and stirring it with a spoon that clinked against the ceramic. "Both of you. The judge is paying attention. I can tell. She's not buying Hartman's act." "But what about what he said about me?" I asked, my voice low. "What if the judge thinks I'm just trying to keep my free housing?" Patricia shook her head. "That's a standard defense tactic. They're trying to muddy the waters. Make this about you instead of about what Ray did. But we have the evidence on our side. We have Dr. Reeves' testimony. We have the neighbor's observations. And this afternoon, we have your mother's testimony. That's what's going to matter." My mother had been quiet, staring down at her soup without eating. Now she looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "I'm going to tell the truth," she said. "All of it, even the parts that make me look foolish or weak. Because that's what happened. I was foolish. I was weak. And Ray took advantage of that." "You're not weak," I said fiercely. "You were grieving. There's a difference." The afternoon session began with Uncle Ray taking the stand. He looked comfortable up there, relaxed, as if he were sitting in his own living room rather than under oath in a court of law. Douglas Hartman walked him through his version of events, a story of brotherly concern and responsible financial planning. I was worried about Linda. Uncle Ray said, his voice warm and sincere, "After my brother-in-law passed, God rest his soul, I could see that she was struggling. The house was too much for her. The finances were too complicated. I offered to help, to take some of the burden off her shoulders." "And did Mrs. Mitchell seem to understand what she was signing?" Hartman asked. "Absolutely," Ray said without hesitation. "We went through everything carefully. I made sure she understood each document. She asked questions, I answered them. She signed her own free will. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie, but he told it so smoothly, so convincingly, that for a moment I felt a flicker of doubt. What if the judge believed him? What if his polished performance outweighed our evidence? Then it was Patricia's turn. She stood up slowly, gathering her notes, and approached the witness stand with the air of a predator circling prey. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice pleasant but with an edge underneath, "you testified that you were concerned about your sister's ability to manage her finances. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct." "And yet, you didn't suggest that she hire a financial advisor, did you? You didn't recommend that she work with an accountant or a lawyer of her own choosing." "I offered to help her myself," Ray said. "I didn't see the need to bring in strangers." "Strangers," Patricia repeated. "But you did bring someone with you when you had her sign the documents, didn't you? A lawyer friend of yours." "Yes, to make sure everything was done properly. But not a lawyer representing your sister's interests. A lawyer representing yours." Ray shifted slightly in his seat, the first sign of discomfort. He was there to make sure the documents were legally sound, he said. Patricia nodded, as if this made perfect sense, and then she changed direction. "Mr. Mitchell, are you currently in debt?" The question hung in the air. Ray's face tightened, his jaw clenching. "I don't see how that's relevant," he said. "Please answer the question," Judge Thornton said, her voice neutral but firm. "I have some business obligations." Ray admitted. "Business obligations," Patricia repeated. "Is it true that you owe approximately $200,000 to various creditors?" "That's a temporary situation," Ray said, his voice rising slightly. "I'm in the process of restructuring." "And isn't it true that you approached several lenders about refinancing these debts and were turned down?" "Objection," Hartman called out, standing up. "Relevance." "Your Honor," Patricia said, turning to the judge. "The defendant's financial situation is directly relevant to his motive for obtaining control of his sister's assets." "Overruled," Judge Thornton said. "The witness will answer question." Ray's face had gone red, his composure cracking. "I may have been turned down by one or two lenders," he said, "but that doesn't mean I would steal from my own sister." "No one used the word steal, Mr. Mitchell," Patricia said calmly. "But since you brought it up, let's talk about what you plan to do with the house once you had control of it. You were planning to sell it, weren't you?" "Eventually, yes. But Linda would have been taken care of." "Taken care of how? Exactly?" "According to the trust documents, you have sole discretion over how much money she receives and when. She would be entirely dependent on your generosity." "She's my sister," Ray said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "I would never let her go without." Patricia let the words hang there for a moment. Let the jury, let the judge, let everyone in the courtroom consider what they really meant. Then she moved in for the final blow. "Mr. Mitchell, did you tell your sister that if she refused to sign the documents, you would have her declared incompetent and placed in a nursing home?" The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter seemed to pause, her fingers hovering over her machine. Ray started, then stopped. "I may have mentioned that as an option if she was truly unable to care for herself." "You threatened her," Patricia said, her voice sharp now. Cutting. "You threatened your own sister, a grieving widow, with being taken from her home and placed in an institution if she didn't give you control of everything she owned." "That's not how it was," Ray said. But he was floundering now, his smooth facade completely shattered. "I was trying to help her see reason." Patricia turned away from him, dismissing him with a gesture. "No further questions," she said. The courtroom erupted in whispers, people leaning toward each other, sharing reactions. Judge Thornton banged her gavel, calling for order, but I barely heard it. I was watching Uncle Ray's face, watching the realization dawn that he had just destroyed his own case. The final witness was my mother. She walked to the stand with her head held high, and I felt a surge of pride watching her. She had come so far from that broken woman in the kitchen, clutching papers she didn't understand. Patricia's questions were gentle, allowing my mother to tell her story in her own words. She talked about the fog of grief she had been living in, about how Uncle Ray had visited repeatedly, always pressing, always insisting that she needed his help. She talked about the day she signed the papers, How confused she had been. How Ray's lawyer friend had used words she didn't understand. How she had felt pressured and afraid. He told me that Jamie was too young, too inexperienced, she said, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. He told me that I was becoming a burden to her, that I was ruining her life. He made me feel like signing those papers was the only way to protect my daughter from having to take care of me. "And do you believe that now?" Patricia asked gently. "No," my mother said, looking directly at me. "Now I know that family takes care of family. That needing help isn't the same as being a burden. That my daughter loves me and wants to help me, and that I should have trusted her instead of trusting my brother." Douglas Hartman's cross-examination was brief. I think even he could see that attacking my mother now would only make his client look worse. He asked a few perfunctory questions about her mental state, about whether she had read the documents before signing, but his heart wasn't in it. When my mother stepped down from the stand, she walked directly to me and took my hand. We sat there together, waiting for the judge's decision, and I realized that no matter what happened, we had already won something important. We had stood up for ourselves. We had fought back. We had refused to be victims. Judge Thornton took a recess to review the evidence and consider her ruling. We waited in the hallway, sitting on one of those hard wooden benches that seemed designed to be as uncomfortable as possible. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. People came and went, other cases being heard in other courtrooms. The machinery of justice grinding on around us. Patricia paced, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a steady rhythm. My mother sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes closed. I couldn't tell if she was praying or just trying to find some inner calm. I felt like I might crawl out of my skin with anxiety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bailiff emerged and called us back in. We filed into the courtroom, taking our seats and waited for the judge to enter. When she did, her face was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented," Judge Thornton began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "I have considered the testimony of all witnesses, the expert opinions, and the documents in question. This is a case that troubles me deeply, as it involves the breakdown of family trust and the vulnerability of our elderly citizens. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear in my ears, could feel in my throat. My mother's hand found mine, and we held on to each other like drowning people clutching a life raft. The law is clear that adults have the right to make their own decisions regarding their property and finances," the judge continued. "However, the law also recognizes that undue influence can invalidate such decisions. Undue influence occurs when someone in a position of trust uses that position to overcome the free will of another person, particularly when that person is in a vulnerable state." She paused, looking directly at Uncle Ray, who sat rigid in his chair, his face pale. "In this case, I find that the evidence overwhelmingly supports a finding of undue influence. Mr. Raymond Mitchell took advantage of his sister's grief and confusion. He isolated her from other sources of advice and support. He brought his own legal representation while ensuring she had none. He used threats and manipulation to coerce her into signing documents that she did not fully understand and that were not in her best interest. I felt my mother's grip tighten on my hand, felt her whole body tense beside me. Furthermore, the evidence of Mr. Mitchell's financial difficulties provides a clear motive for his actions. This was not, as he claimed, an act of brotherly concern. This was an attempt to gain control of valuable assets to solve his own financial problems. Judge Thornton picked up her gavel, and the sound of it hitting the bench seemed to echo through my entire body. Therefore, I hereby declare all documents signed by Mrs. Linda Mitchell on the date in question to be null and void. All property, assets, and rights are to be immediately returned to Mrs. Mitchell's sole control. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Raymond Mitchell to pay all legal fees and court costs incurred by the plaintiff in this matter. The gavel came down again, final and absolute. This court is adjourned. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. Then my mother turned to me, and she was crying, but she was also smiling, and I realized I was crying too. We held each other, right there in the courtroom, while around us people gathered their things and filed out. Patricia came over, her own eyes suspiciously bright, and put a hand on each of our shoulders. "You did it," she said. "You won." "We won," my mother corrected, looking at me. "We won together." Uncle Ray left the courtroom without looking at us, Douglas Hartman hurrying after him, already on his phone, probably already planning an appeal. But I didn't care. Let him appeal. We had won the first battle, and we would win the next one, too, if we had to. The drive home felt surreal. The world looked the same as it had that morning. The same gray February sky. The same bare trees lining the streets. The same houses with their windows glowing warm against the cold. But everything had changed. We had our home back. We had our future back. We had ourselves back. When we pulled into the driveway, my mother sat for a moment, just looking at the house. It needed paint, I noticed. The shutters were loose on one side. The front steps had a crack that should be repaired before someone tripped. But it was ours. It was home. Inside, the house welcomed us with familiar smells and sounds. The creak of the door, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock in the hallway. My mother walked through each room, touching things, the back of the couch, the kitchen counter, the banister on the stairs, as if reassuring herself that they were real, that they were still here. I made tea, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where this nightmare had begun months ago. But now the papers spread out in front of us were different. They were the court's ruling, the official documents restoring everything to my mother's name, proof that justice, sometimes, actually worked. "I need to tell you something," my mother said, wrapping her hands around her mug, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "I need to apologize." "Mom, you don't have to apologize for anything." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "I let Ray manipulate me. I let him make me doubt you, doubt myself. I was so lost in my grief that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You were there every day, taking care of me, taking care of everything. And I repaid you by signing away our home. You were grieving," I said. "You were vulnerable. That's not your fault." "Maybe not," she said, "but I should have been stronger. Your father would have been so disappointed in me." "No," I said firmly. "Dad would have understood. And he would be so proud of you for fighting back, for standing up in that courtroom and telling the truth." "That took real courage, Mom." She smiled a real smile, the first genuine one I had seen in months. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" she said. It wasn't really a question. "We're going to be better than okay. I promised." And we were. It wasn't easy and it wasn't immediate, but slowly, day by day, we rebuilt our lives. My mother started seeing a therapist, working through her grief in a healthy way instead of letting it consume her. She joined a support group for widows, made new friends, found new purpose. I helped her set up a proper system for managing the household finances, but I made sure she understood every part of it, made sure she felt in control. We met with a financial advisor, a real one this time, someone who worked for us, not for someone else's interests. We updated her will, established a proper power of attorney that included safeguards and oversight, made sure that what happened with Uncle Ray could never happen again. The house got its paint job, a cheerful yellow that my mother chose herself. We fixed the shutters and the steps and a dozen other small things that had been neglected. We planted new flowers in the garden, bright colors that would bloom in the spring. We made the house feel alive again, feel like a home instead of a mausoleum for memories. Uncle Ray did appeal the decision, but his appeal was denied. He declared bankruptcy 6 months later, and I heard through the family grapevine that he had moved out of state, trying to start over somewhere where people didn't know about his disgrace. I felt a twinge of pity for him, but only a twinge. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. Sarah called me one evening, almost a year after the trial. I almost didn't answer, seeing her name on my phone screen, but curiosity got the better of me. "Jamie," she said when I picked up, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't help you when you needed it. I was a coward. I thought about being angry, about telling her exactly what I thought of her choice to stay silent. But I was tired of anger, tired of family drama, tired of holding grudges. I understand why you did what you did," I said. "I don't agree with it, but I understand it." "How is Aunt Linda?" she asked. "She's good," I said. She's really good. Actually, stronger than she's been in years. I'm glad, Sarah said, and she sounded like she meant it. Tell her. Tell her I'm sorry. And tell her I miss her. You could tell her yourself, I suggested. She'd probably like to hear from you. There was a long pause. Maybe I will, Sarah said finally. Maybe I will. She did, eventually. It took time, and there were awkward conversations and difficult moments. But slowly, carefully, they rebuilt their relationship. Not what it had been before, but something new, something honest. 2 years after the trial, on a warm spring morning, I found my mother in the backyard, kneeling in the dirt, planting tomatoes. Her hands were covered in soil, her face flushed from the sun and the effort, and she looked more like herself than she had since my father died. The roses he had planted were blooming, red and pink and white, their scent heavy in the air. Birds sang in the trees, and somewhere down the street, children were laughing. I brought her a glass of lemonade, condensation already forming on the outside of the glass, and sat down on the grass beside her. The ground was warm beneath me, the grass soft and slightly damp from the morning watering. Remember when you asked me if we were going to be okay? I said. She sat back on her heels, accepting the lemonade gratefully, taking a long drink before answering. I remember, she said, you told me we'd be better than okay. Were you right? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. She looked around the yard, at the flowers blooming, at the house standing solid and cheerful behind us, at me sitting beside her. Then she looked down at her hands, at the dirt under her fingernails, at the evidence of work and life and purpose. Yes, she said simply, you were right. We sat there in comfortable silence, drinking lemonade, feeling the sun on our faces. Inside the house, the phone rang, but neither of us moved to answer it. Whatever it was could wait. This moment, this peace, this hard-won happiness, was more important. I thought about my father, about the letter he had written, about his faith in my mother's strength. He had been right, too. She was stronger than anyone had given her credit for, stronger than she had given herself credit for. She had been knocked down, but she had gotten back up. She had been manipulated and betrayed, but she had fought back. She had lost her way, but she had found it again, and I had learned something, too. I had learned that protecting the people you love sometimes means fighting battles you never want to fight. I had learned that family can be both your greatest source of support and your greatest source of pain. I had learned that home isn't just a building or a piece of property. It's the memories and the love and the life you build inside it. The legal bills have been substantial, even with Uncle Ray being ordered to pay them. It had taken me months to pay off what I had borrowed, months of careful budgeting and sacrifice, but it had been worth it. Every penny, every sleepless night, every moment of stress and fear, it had all been worth it to see my mother like this, whole and happy and free. Patricia had become a friend, stopping by occasionally for coffee, always asking how we were doing, always ready to offer advice if we needed it. She had told me once that our case had reminded her why she had gone into law in the first place, to help people, to fight for justice, to make a difference. She had framed the judge's ruling and hung it in her office. She said, as a reminder that sometimes the good guys really do win. The house had become more than just a place to live. It had become a symbol of our resilience, our refusal to be victims, our determination to hold on to what was ours. Every room held memories, some painful, some joyful, all of them part of the tapestry of our lives. The kitchen where we had faced our crisis and our victory. The living room where we had spent countless evenings before and after my father's death, talking and laughing and sometimes crying. The bedrooms where we had slept and dreamed and woken to face new days. The backyard where life continued to grow and bloom despite everything. My mother finished her lemonade and set the glass down carefully on the grass. Then she picked up her trowel and went back to planting, her movements sure and practiced. I watched her for a moment, then got up and went to get my own gardening gloves. If she was planting tomatoes, I might as well plant some peppers. We would have a good harvest this year. I thought we would have abundance as I knelt in the dirt beside her, feeling the earth cool and alive beneath my hands. I thought about all the things that could have gone wrong, all the ways we could have lost, if we hadn't found Patricia, if the judge had ruled differently. If my mother hadn't found the strength to fight, if I had given up when things looked hopeless, any one of those things could have changed everything. But they hadn't. We had been lucky, yes, but we had also been strong. We had been brave. We had been together. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming our backs as we worked. The smell of fresh earth and growing things filled the air. A bee buzzed past, heavy with pollen, on its way to the roses. The world continued its eternal cycle of growth and change and renewal. Inside the house, the phone had stopped ringing. The clock in the hallway continued its steady tick. The refrigerator hummed its familiar song. Everything was as it should be, as it was meant to be, as we had fought to keep it. That evening, we made dinner together, fresh pasta with vegetables from last year's garden that we had frozen. We ate at the kitchen table, talking about ordinary things, the weather, the neighbors, what we might plant next year. The conversation was easy, comfortable, the kind of talk that happens between people who know each other deeply and love each other completely. After dinner, we sat on the front porch, watching the sunset, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of someone's barbecue and the sound of evening birds settling in for the night. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we had lost?" my mother asked suddenly. I considered the question, really considered it, instead of just brushing it aside. Sometimes, I admitted, but then I remind myself that we didn't lose. We won, and that's what matters. She nodded, rocking slowly in her chair, the old wood creaking with each movement. "I used to be so angry at Ray," she said. "So angry I could barely think about anything else. But now, I mostly just feel sad for him. He had a family who loved him, and he threw it all away for money he didn't even get to keep." "That's very generous of you," I said. "Not generous," she said. "Just tired of being angry. Life's too short to spend it hating people, even people who deserve it." We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. I found myself looking for the constellations I had memorized as a child, the ones I had recreated on my bedroom ceiling. There was Orion, his belt clearly visible. There was the Big Dipper, pointing the way to the North Star. There was Cassiopeia, sitting in her chair, eternal and unchanging. "I'm proud of you," my mother said, her voice soft in the darkness. I don't think I've said that enough. But I am. I'm so proud of the person you've become, of how you fought for us, of how you never gave up. I felt tears prickling at my eyes, felt my throat tightening with emotion. "I'm proud of you too, Mom," I said. "You're the strongest person I know." We sat there on the porch until mosquitoes drove us inside, until the night had fully fallen, and the street lights had come on, casting their orange glow across the quiet neighborhood. We locked the doors and turned off the lights and went to our separate rooms, secure in the knowledge that this house, this home, was ours. Not because a piece of paper said so, though that helped, but because we had fought for it, bled for it, refused to let it go. In my room, I lay in bed, looking up at those faded glow-in-the-dark stars, and I thought about the journey we had been on, from that terrible morning in the kitchen to this peaceful evening on the porch, from fear and uncertainty to strength and security, from being victims to being survivors to being, finally, simply ourselves. The house set around me, all its familiar sounds a lullaby, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant sound of my mother moving around in her room, getting ready for bed. These sounds were home. These sounds were safety. These sounds were love. I thought about my father, about how much I missed him, about how much I wished he could see us now. But in a way, maybe he could. Maybe he was in every board and nail of this house, in every memory we had made here, in every moment of strength we had found when we needed it most. Maybe he had never really left at all. Sleep came slowly, gently, like a soft blanket being pulled up over me. And as I drifted off, I felt at peace. We had been tested, and we had passed. We had been broken, and we had healed. We had been lost, and we had found our way home.